if you look at the continent, we've always been reliant on the natural resources, whether it be gold, oil, diamonds across the board. And what we've seen is the commodity prices of those have started to come down. The next area that the continent is looking to for growth is tourism. So that's a space that we all want to magnify, that we want to amplify. And you know, the African continent is a very beautiful place, and we've got the world to show what we have to offer. Not only the continent, I mean the world as well, but also intra-Africa trade becomes important.
Yes, but again, you did mention something interesting there, that how Africa has a lot to offer, but there is still a lot that is left untapped, like an untapped field. But what would be the value of encouraging intra-African trade in tourism, and what impact could this have on the job creation, let alone the African brand across the globe?
Well, I mean, if you look at the issues that are occupying the world leaders at the moment, it's all around the fourth industrial revolution, and that's essentially robots taking over people's jobs. Tourism is a natural mitigator of that because it is labor intensive. So it is a space that's actually poised for growth. Just to give you some examples, you know, South Africa, in the 2016 calendar year, we experienced the highest level of international tourists. We hit the magical 10 million mark. Now, the interesting part of that is that 74% of the 10 million is actually African visitors coming into South Africa. So the continent, in terms of providing tourism jobs, providing tourism activity, is very important for us in South Africa.
Yes, again, just help us understand on the back of, you did mention 75% of the tourism is heading down to South Africa. Now, we did see at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the key conversation was basically on how to live in like it was basically more on climate change. And today we did see something in Cape Town where we saw a water crisis. Now, how can African nations encourage travel while facing challenges like climatic change challenges as what we saw in Cape Town, the water crisis? How can that be?
Absolutely. I mean, we are in the middle of that at the moment. And what you're seeing, South Africa, Cape Town, is really setting the benchmark, you know, for world-class cities as to how to respond to climate change. This is not unique to South Africa or even Cape Town alone, but we've seen other cities such as Los Angeles, Sao Paulo, even the likes of Abu Dhabi as well, also facing water crisis issues. The key here, the message I want to send is that this is the new normal. This is now how we are going to lead with ecotourism in terms of how we want international tourists and domestic ones to actually, you know, travel through from a responsible tourism perspective. Key to add here, however, is that we still want to encourage people to visit Cape Town. You know, however, we want everyone to be mindful and to be acutely aware of the water crisis issues. And as I said earlier on, this is the new benchmark. It's not just going to be, you know, in South Africa or in Cape Town alone, but over the next couple of years, we'll start to see how, you know, world-class cities start to really bring about the importance of this, you know, finite resource.
Thank you again. One very first question that I would like to touch base with is, now, again, I'll bring you back to your conversation where you told me that at least 75% of the tourists go down to South Africa. Now, let's look at it from an African perspective, because this is a Pan-African channel. What should be done, or how can we actually push for more, like to see actually more regions like West Africa, which is a very developed region, by the way, or maybe East Africa, that is an emerging market, get some of this, like get a piece of the pie?
Absolutely. I think just to clarify there, what I was saying is that out of all of our total international visitors into South Africa, 74% of them are actually African visitors. So we rely a lot on the continent to be for our tourism sector. Absolutely. You know, we have formed an association called RETOSA, Regional Tourism Organizational Bodies of Southern Africa. And what we realized there is that we actually need to collaborate as a region to make sure that we all upgrade our tourism facilities. Everything from grading, star grading an example, to make sure that a 3-star in South Africa is comparable to a 3-star in Zimbabwe or even Angola as an example. That's the first part. The second part is also to look at what we call business tourism, and these are the conferencing space. I mean, you'd know quite well in Rwanda in itself, you know, the ICC is really testament to how the focus is around having conferencing and everything around that side. So we're starting from a regional side, but over time, we want to make sure that we develop the continent as a tourism hub, because we want to believe that each country's got its own unique features that it can showcase as well, you know, to the world. The global stats in terms of the sector of tourism growing is about 7% per annum. So we want the African continent to have a share of this as well. Then the last kind of opportunity that's there is the continent's total market share of the global tourism space is only 5%, right? So that's 54 countries literally only getting 5% of the pie. Comparable, the Middle East has a 5% stake as well. You know, so we've got such a long way to go in terms of making sure that we get more market share and we drive the growth within the continent as well.
Sisa, maybe let's drive the conversation back home to Rwanda. Now, the country has hopes to make or generate revenues in the tourism industry up to a $2 billion receipt. Now, Rwanda is a relatively smaller country and not as advanced as South Africa is as of today, but it is pretty much an emerging market for tourism. When we look at, they sold close to 1,039 permits of gorilla trekking as of May to July. Just help me understand, what can the country put in place to actually hit some of these targets midterm?
I mean, look, I think the first one is to understand what's a unique selling proposition. What is unique that Rwanda has to offer that no other country around the world has to offer as well. Remember that the tourist has choices. They can go to any other destination. So why should they come to Rwanda? I think that's the first part. The second part is to understand geographically in terms of where Rwanda is placed, right? We have to make sure that you've got good airline connectivity to make sure that you can connect the world into the country, so that, you know, flight availability and frequency of it are quite important as well. The last one is to look at the conferencing space, right? And you've done that quite well as Rwanda to make sure that you place yourself on the global map as a conference destination and start to get your fair shake of what happens around those spaces. Key thing around conferences is that it rotates. So it makes sense for African countries to actually collaborate and work together to make sure that they are part of this conferencing circuit. So I think those are the top of my mind in terms of some of the key things. Of course, I mean, you've done this quite well in terms of reducing the barriers there. Things like visas, facilitating visas on arrivals or not having visas at all leads to ease of movement, between what we call the source markets where you want the tourists to come from into Rwanda itself.
Now, another thing that I would like to look at is for our smaller market as Rwanda is, but also a growing one, and East Africa as a region, what do you have to say, or what does South Africa as a market that is pretty much advanced has to advise for these other markets in the east of the continent on the terms of price points, like price points? We did see an increment of close to 100% increment on the gorilla trekking permits as of last year to 1,500. It was quite huge, but it did pick up as we moved into the year. However, what does you as the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Tourism advise on the same?
Look, it's a tricky balance, and you don't want to outprice yourself out of the market. As I said earlier on, is that the astute traveler knows they have options, so they're always looking for value for money. I'm not saying commoditize what you have, because if you've got a unique experience, of course you can start to charge a premium for it. But at some point in time, you are going to have the opposite effect happening where people don't come anymore. So you've got to make sure that you've got the right price point as well. We live in a world of what we call dynamic pricing, right? Which basically the price is determined by the time of the day, the time of the year, by also the popularity of the destination itself as well. So, you know, you've got to keep all of those in mind as well. Key, what I would say, and I'd like to promote within the East Africa region, is collaboration, right? We need to collaborate, you know, collaborate to compete, essentially. Understanding that we are essentially a long-haul destination for some of the key markets around the US, Europe, and even China, or rather the East as well. So you got to know that you're a long-haul destination, that at times giving the tourist a 4-country experience is more beneficial than just hogging them to one country for a formidable amount of time. So collaboration becomes key, as long as each experience is different and each country has something different to offer into the package itself. You know, you always hear about Africa being the last undiscovered frontier. Definitely, we've got to play into that space and make sure we collaborate. As South African Tourism, we actually host an annual tourism indaba in Durban in May, and we invite all of the continent to showcase its ability to the world to be a formidable leisure destination as well, and also a tourism hub to the world.